dealt with. So that's great. Right, well, lovely to see you all. And let's just introduce Mary Darling and Clark. And they've been involved in producing films, and especially one called, or a sitcom anyway, The Little Mosque on the Prairie, which is a lovely wee take on that original television sitcom. Anyway, this apparently was the world's first Muslim sitcom. And it's been the subject, as you can imagine, of academic studies and news features because of its use of media to eliminate prejudice. So they're very interested in the grassroots process of community building and combining this with learning about media as it reflects and influences humanity. So fascinating subject. And I'll just hand it over to Mary and Clark to do a bit of screen sharing and put yourselves on mute.
Feel free to ask questions at any point as we're going through our little talk. It's very informal, so we love it when people just sort of give and take as we go. So it's more of a conversation than a presentation, but maybe you would talk a little bit about.
Well, you know, it's so interesting to be talking to all of you, and I know some of you are Baha'is and some of you aren't, but I think all of us want to do something good in the world, you know, and for us as Baha'is, when I became a Baha'i, I was so interested in this concept that God has sent messengers to the planet right at the time when we needed them. And I was raised in the Christian faith, but I always wondered why there were a billion Muslims and a billion Buddhists and a billion other people as well. And it never made any sense to me. And then I found out what Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, said. And one of the most interesting figures was Muhammad, because I'd always wondered about Islam and this Muhammad. And there were so many different things that I heard, and a lot of them didn't sound true. And the more I read about him, and I think it's the same for you, we just fell in love with this figure that came and created this marvelous civilization. Historians now are recognizing the contributions that Islam made to the world. Anyways, we're television producers. So how can we take this newfound knowledge and this newfound love and bring it out into the world in something other than a documentary or something serious? And, you know, there's enough bloodshed on the air already. And then Mary and I were at this television conference in Banff, Alberta, which is beautiful in the Canadian Rockies. And this young Muslim woman walked up to us and said,
well, she was there actually because she was a filmmaker and made a feature film and didn't really even know what this market was, what this television market was. And so she sort of found herself in the delegates lounge sitting on this couch, and a friend of ours said, you know, I think you guys might connect because you're interested in religion. And so we went and sat down with this wonderful young woman and said, if you could do anything you wanted to do, what would it be? And she said, I would love to make a comedy about my community. And so we thought, you know, funny Muslims, that might be really, you know, back in 2007, six, yeah. That might be something that the world has never thought about before, given sort of living in a post 9/11 world and the way that increased prejudice against Muslims. In fact, we have a friend in the US who's very high up in the Muslim affairs organization there. And they said that post 9/11, pre 9/11, they were really focusing on trying to do outreach and have people understand what Islam is and who Muhammad was and why it's important that we understand Islam. And post 9/11, it was really just damage control, trying to manage the prejudice that was happening against Muslims. And then, like, the first violent attack in Canada was actually against a Sikh. So people don't even know the difference between a Sikh and a Muslim. So when Zarka mentioned this idea of doing something funny, sort of something that could humanize Muslims and help people understand Islam a little bit more, we began developing it with her right away. And so we came out with a series called Little Mosque on the Prairie. Our first season was 8 episodes and it was very, very well received. And then we went on to do 6 seasons of that, or 91 episodes. And we thought maybe we would just share, in case people don't know the series, we could just share one brief excerpt from our first season about the mosque trying to throw an open house for the community. Yeah.
Yeah, just to give you a very brief idea for those of you who haven't seen it, probably most of you, one of the main characters is a young imam who was a lawyer and became an imam, so a religious leader in this mosque. But the only place he can get a job is out in the middle of the Canadian prairies, and the only place they can find to rent a mosque is in the local church. So there's a wonderful, at first it's actually taken under false pretenses, but once the reverend of that church, who's having trouble filling his church, finds out that it is a mosque, he welcomes them. So we meant that as an example too. But you'll see in this one, the new imam thinks that in order to increase understanding, they should have an open house. And because it's a comedy, nothing ever goes very well.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Oops, I think I have to choose it. Let me stop once first. I think I have to choose a couple of buttons to make sure it plays well. Share sound. There we go. Okay, can everybody see that all right?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see if you can hear it all right as well.
Alhamdulillah, the lights are finally working. I thought they would find Bin Laden first.
Your electricians did a great job, Yasser. Thanks for fixing the lights.
You're welcome.
Babar?
What he said. Now stop that. You're going to give me a seizure.
Madam Mayor, so nice of it to join us.
Thank you. Where would you like me to sit?
How about right here?
All right, thank you.
Okay. Oh, our first visitors, come on in. Hi, I'm the one you heard on Wake Up People.
Wake Up People.
What?
Hi, pleasure to have you here.
Hi, come on in. Hi. Could you take your boots off, sir? Your boots are...
Lovely to see you.
Welcome to the mosque.
Hi, come on in. Put yourself in. There's lots of...
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for coming.
Islam has 5 pillars, and they are...
Hey, you guys got a mini bar instead of a pulpit. So where do you keep the vino?
It is minbar, not minibar. Muslims are not allowed to drink alcohol.
Not even a couple of brewskis during breakup.
Never.
No hooch? I'd pray 5 times a day, too.
I don't think Joe's going to be converting to Islam anytime soon.
If you're a feminist, why do you cover your hair?
Well, it's about modesty. Hair is part of your sexuality, so you only show it to other women.
So you're gay?
No, I'd show it to my husband.
Okay, so you're married.
No.
No, not yet. Can you show it to your boyfriend?
Boyfriend? Well, Muslims can't even date.
Mom.
Really? We do date.
You call that dating? It's more like a job interview.
No. It's like window shopping. See, you don't need to taste the cake to know that it's going to be delicious.
Well, of course you do.
The cake could look good and still be crummy, or it might be a fruitcake, and you know how we all feel about fruitcake.
Mom!
Step away from the metaphor. Okay, so anyway, it's
I think I'm just gonna go talk to your reverend, priesty, rabbi guy.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Mom, now no, it wasn't.
Nice turnout, Mr. Birchwood. It's such an honor to have you here at our little mosque.
It's a bit shabby. If only they'd let you use some of that Hamoudi magic around it.
Yes, that's what I've been saying, but can I get you anything? No booze, I'm afraid.
I think I'll sample some of that curry. Smells delicious.
Absolutely.
And then the descendants of the companion of the prophet finally reached Africa. And that takes us to the end of the 8th century.
Oh, dear God. I thought you were going to do this yourself.
It's politics. I'm sure you understand.
Not really. I always get my own way.
Tax plan?
Take 2.
Did you know that business is a very, very important part of Islam? Even the Prophet, peace be upon him, was a businessman. Now, if you ever need any work done to your home, you know who to call.
We said bridge building, not home building, remember?
Amar, look around you. You have nothing to worry about. Pat yourself on the back. The open house has gone off without a hitch. All right, maybe one little hitch.
Things don't always go as planned.
So that was the electrical short, in case it wasn't obvious.
So, I mean, I think one of the interesting things for us about working in media is just, even if you're making a comedy or if you're trying to make a drama or a documentary, is always thinking about what's the idea? You know, what's the idea? Is it moving in a positive direction? Is it trying to introduce people to something new or help people think in a new way? Or is it doing the opposite? And I think we can probably agree that a lot of the media that's being made today isn't about building bridges. It's about, or even maybe even thinking about that. And whether by accident or on purpose, we end up seeing our media building a lot of divides and becoming quite polarizing. And I think we can't think that it's just something that happens. You know, when we see what's happening in the world today and the division and the polarization, some of that can be directly attributed to what we're watching, what we're feeding our minds.
Yeah, and so we try to embed in the midst of the comedy certain things that people probably didn't know, particularly in the West. You know, for example, a lot of people don't realize that Islam reveres Jesus Christ at an extremely high level. A lot of people don't realize that the foundation of Judaism and Christianity and Islam all see Abraham as being this pivotal figure in their history. So we embedded some of these concepts in there. And it was very interesting to work with writers, because we're working with comedy writers who mostly just know how to make jokes about beer, you know? And so going on this journey with them was very interesting as well, because it starts to raise questions in people. Well, if Islam was this wonderful thing, what's going on in the world today? You know, what's going on in the world today with Islam and Christianity and so on, and especially in a time when we seem to see that a lot of our old institutions are not doing that well, are actually kind of dissolving before our eyes. Is religion even important anymore? And so as filmmakers and television makers, of course, and as Baha'is particularly, we're really interested in what Baha'u'llah said, because he introduced this concept of progressive revelation. I don't know how much you've had a chance to talk about that, but it's this idea that basically humanity is like a school, and that we, of millions of years, and that as we progress and move from infancy into childhood and into adolescence, God sends a messenger, which is the perfect messenger for that moment in our human history, and the perfect messenger to advance our civilization forward. And that's why it looks like there's kind of a smorgasbord of religions where you sort of pick from one or the other. But in actual fact, what God has done is to take us through grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 and on and on. And now he says we are firmly in our adolescence, moving towards maturity. And we still have some adolescents in our home, so we know what that looks like.
But I think adolescence gets a really bad rap. And I think that as a group and as individuals and communities, and especially as institutions, when we start to rethink about what adolescence is, I think things get very interesting. So when we think about humanity being in an adolescent stage, we might look at those things and say, well, most adolescents are pretty fixated on identity. Well, identity is definitely a hot button issue right now. And many are thinking kind of about themselves first. I think we see that in humanity. And many are trying to reorganize and rethink the way the world thinks. And you can see that that's certainly happening in our world, that there's those that are very stuck to the way things have always been, and there are those that are trying to think about new ways of building things. But mostly I think adolescence kind of gets a bad rap. But as a Baha'i, I would say to be living at the point of adolescence of humanity gives me great hope for the future. Because adolescence is a pretty messy stage, but it's also for a limited time only. You go through adolescence, it's very, very difficult, but it's not all bad. During adolescence, we think about reinventing ourselves. We think about the potential that's out there. We think about how to use resources differently. We think about looking at the adults around us and taking sort of what's best from them. And also, we're also at a stage where we, haven't lost our ability to imagine and create. So when I think about humanity being in a stage of adolescence, you can see the turmoil part of adolescence very clearly right now. And it might feel harder to see the potentiality of adolescence as we move towards maturity as a collective whole. So I think that's something that we've been thinking a lot about, not only in our work, and sometimes I would say that, we're sort of pegged for the kind of work that we're doing in broadcast, meaning, trying to reach many people with media or entertainment, but probably more than ever, especially during COVID, like you guys, we've been really trying to focus on our neighborhood. And in our family, because we travel a lot, typically, not during COVID, we travel a lot and our kids were going to schools outside of our immediate area. We really didn't get to know our neighborhood very well until COVID hit. And at that point, our 14 and 16-year-old kids, the two last left, I see Bree is here, she's my eldest, that they decided that they wanted to sort of try to have a conversation with our neighborhood. And so they wrote a letter to the 48 houses closest to us and just said, we're really interested in getting to know you. We've never spent very much time in our neighborhood because of these reasons that I mentioned. And we're wondering if during this time, we might not be moving into a phase where it's important that we really get to know each other more personally so that we can be of help and service to each other. And in that initial reach out, we learned that there was a man in our neighborhood who needed to be connected with his neighbors, whose wife had recently passed, who didn't really have a means of being out, that it was dangerous to be out in the community for him. And so the neighbors took care of making sure that his needs were taken care of during that initial time. And through it, we sort of started to try to have a conversation with these people we'd never met before, which is really interesting because like this meeting, we only know each other literally from the shoulders up, and so a lot of the people who we were having conversations with, we had never met before. And so they would show up like this on a Zoom meeting or on a WhatsApp chat. And, we have to try to identify what house they were in and stuff.
And if they had any legs.
Yeah. But yeah, so we've been sort of at that, sort of trying to build that conversation with our neighbors for about a year now. And I think that's been some of the most interesting work that we've done in the last 15 years, has been just getting to know our neighbors and learning about them and trying to understand where people are coming from today, what they're thinking about, how we can be of service to them. And I think maybe because of the way that I found the Baha'i faith, I think I always think that there might be people who are feeling withdrawn or marginalized, or like, where do I look for hope? So I look at houses as I drive by sometimes, and I think, I wonder if that person's lonely in there. Or I wonder if that person is wondering about God, but they don't know where to look. Or I wonder if that person goes to church anymore, or these kinds of things. And so we've sort of just made it made a plan to try to reach these 48 houses and really try to get to know the people in them. And I would say maybe 50%, right?
Yeah.
Have opened their doors to begin to have a conversation with us about life today.
And I think that just going back to this idea that we're all moving, that humanity is moving through these stages, people are feeling pretty tough right now with COVID. And this idea that we're entering or moving towards a stage of maturity, we find really gives people hope, because it makes sense. And so what does that maturity look like? And so the principles of the Baha'i faith are what we believe is what that maturity looks like. So things like the principle of the equality of women and men, which of course sounds, most people think that now, but this was given in Iran in the middle of the 19th century.
And I would say that even if somebody doesn't believe in the equality of women and men right now, that eventually they will catch up, that some people can be, as a friend of ours said, years or decades behind, but that I don't think you're going to be in very many circles anymore where people aren't able to express the idea that women and men are equal.
Right. And another principle is that science and religion are the two paths to truth, that there's only one truth, and that I love this one, that science and religion are those pathways. And the writings even say that religion without science falls into superstition, and science without religion falls into materialism. So those are just a couple of the principles of maturity that we're all striving to move towards. And of course, the whole world in many ways is striving in one way or another, but these principles that Baha'u'llah brought really light one up. They light up your heart and they light up your mind.
The other thing I was just thinking about is that Baha'u'llah makes it very clear. So Baha'u'llah is the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, but he makes it very clear that we are souls, that our actual reality is not just, whatever, our skin wrapped around our bones. And I happen to be Mary and he happens to be Clark and the rest of you are who you are. But that in fact, our true reality is divine, that we are actually souls sort of associating, our souls are associating with these bodies that we call Mary or Clark or Debbie or Bree or whomever. And when I think about things that way, it changes the way I think about people. It gives me greater hope for the capacity to be able to seek the truth or even to transform or change. And the other thing I was really thinking about recently is that Baha'u'llah talks about our reality being our thoughts.
Yeah.
And that our thoughts can change the world. Our thoughts can change our lives. So there's a wonderful quote by Abdul Baha, who's the son of Baha'u'llah. He says, I think this is Abdul Baha, correct me if it is Baha'u'llah. He says, when you have a thought of war, replace it with a stronger thought of peace. And it's interesting because in that single line, and this is something I've thought about, from the time I was a very, very young parent until now I'm a very, very old parent and grandparent at the same time, thanks to Bree making me a grandparent when I was 40, that this idea can actually transform our lives and transform our communities. That when we start to think about the fact that we can create the world that we want to live in, not in some woo-woo kind of new agey kind of way, but that it really matters what our thoughts are. And that we can train ourselves when we're thinking negative thoughts to change those thoughts into something else that can actually have a power to transform. And that those thoughts are willing, that we should be willing to really commit to those things and try to bring them to fruition. So that sometimes shows up in creative projects that we're taking on, or for example, in this work in our neighborhood or in our own families. And that's not to say that we're perfect either. I still have very negative thoughts that I have to fight against. And I still, I'm a beautifully flawed soul, human, trying to strive towards being better. But that this idea that our thoughts matter, I think, is really an important principle that Baha'u'llah brought.
So there's so many things, of course, that we could talk about. There's history and all kinds of things, but that's probably enough of a meal.
But I think it'd be nice just to open it up and
Yeah.
let people take their microphones off and we can just have a conversation. That's always a very fun thing to do.